It's my pleasure to be speaking with Lisa Flynn today, who is, I think it's safe to call her a pioneer in this field. She started early on in 2005. She founded ChildLight Yoga. And then in 2007, she founded Yoga for Classrooms. Both organizations have really helped to spread this work, where she's been working with parents and teachers and administrators. And we'll find out a little bit more about that, hopefully, in our talk. And she's also the author of numerous publications, including a book called Yoga for Children, and is a contributor to and sponsor of a free research repository, which shows her dedication to this work. And I'm fortunate enough to know Lisa a little bit, so I know how sincere she is about this work and how much she really cares about it. And so, so thanks, Lisa. I know it's a little challenge to find the time.
No, I'm so happy to be here. This is what I like to do the most, is sit and chat with friends about this work and how important it is. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks.
Okay. And so, as you know, I sent you the questions in advance. And the first question I've been asking people is how they got involved with this work. Often there's some sort of personal connection that people had with mindfulness or yoga, and then they develop a desire to share that.
Sure. So quite honestly, I think if you had asked me that, 2 years ago, even, I would have said my quick answer, which is, I had my kids and I was practicing yoga and I really wanted something for them that gave them similar benefits to what I was experiencing, but perhaps at a younger age. So that would have been my quick answer. Mm-hmm. More recently, I think it's come up where we dive a little bit more into my history, and I'm being a lot more open about where the roots for my interest in this work really, really, really started. And that really starts with my own childhood and the experiences that I had, some of which were pretty traumatic. I mean, if I took the ACEs, looked at the ACEs scale, I'd have a whole bunch of boxes checked. So I was one of those kids that had a lot of traumatic experiences. And as I got older, as what sometimes can happen is, without having the coping skills that I needed and the emotional resilience that I needed to deal with that, the repercussions of that, as I got older and going through school, I ended up with depression and an eating disorder that really got out of hand by the time I got into college. So I ended up coming home from college, and immediately, the people around me who loved me saw that there was clearly a major issue. And I was in an inpatient treatment facility for the treatment of eating disorders for a while before I was able to start to recover from that. And it was actually in that facility that I was introduced to quote unquote yoga. And I don't know if they actually called it yoga, but that's what it was, come to find out later on. So we'd go into this room and we would have this gentle movement, and it was slow, and you had to kind of be with yourself and be in your body. And then we did this thing called savasana, right, where you lay down on the floor and you close your eyes and relax. And I got to tell you, I absolutely hated it. I despised every moment of that experience. But what I can at the time, because I wasn't quite ready for it, and I understood what they were doing and introducing me to being in my body, but that wasn't quite yet safe for me to do. But I was in a safe space. So that's really important. And that's why these practices can really be helpful from the perspective of being trauma sensitive. And in that case, in the way that they presented it, it really was. They did a great job with it. But the seeds were planted. There was something, I don't know how to describe it. I think something started to shift in me, a new way of thinking, perhaps. It was, for me, a practice of self-compassion, to slow down enough to be in that room and just be really present with what was going on, and moving my body really slowly and being really mindful of my experience, I suppose, subconsciously, that's what I was doing, probably not totally consciously, something started to shift, you know? And over the next several years, you know, I got out of the hospital and I continued to recover for several years. It took a little while. I'm happy to know I was, you know, obviously one of the fortunate ones. That wasn't the case for everyone at the time that I was in the hospital with. So I feel really, really blessed. I think at that point too, a seed was also planted that I wanted something different. So I knew that I wasn't happy, and I knew that I needed something different, but I wasn't quite sure how to get there. Yeah. And when I started to get there, you know, I had a wonderful career. I finished university. I started to have a family and my husband, and I had started practicing yoga again. It dawned on me that I wanted other people, other children to have a different experience than what I had had. And I started to question that if children could have this yoga and mindfulness, these tools for emotional resilience at a young age, could it actually be preventative, quote unquote, medicine, right? Could it actually be an opportunity for us to prevent so many of the mental health issues that we have today, right? With as adults, and most often we're seeing those starting in adolescence, right? I mean, this is where they, you know, I was just reading something yesterday, nearly 50%, there was a big survey done of high school students, nearly 50%, 49 point something % of adolescent youth are clearly demonstrating some level of a mental health challenge, whether it's, anxiety, substance use, cutting, eating disorder related, any of those. That's huge. And so I had this yoga practice and I had my kids and I wanted them to have this practice too. And so I looked around my area. There really wasn't anything for kids at that time. We're talking about, you know, 2002, 2003. I live in, you know, suburban area here about an hour north of Boston. And so, you know, I still had my career in marketing and some other things that I was doing, but I went and took a teacher training to teach children's yoga with the intention that I was just going to bring it back home. I was just going to share a little bit with my kids. But as it ends up, part of the certification process was that I had to teach a community class. So I organized two groups of ages at the community church across the street from my house. And, you know, a bunch of kids came and instantly knew that that's what I was supposed to be doing. I never thought of myself as a teacher, but I have to tell you, from the day I started teaching and seeing the children's response to what I was sharing with them and how much they craved that time and attention and one-on-one and moments to be silent. We were playing games, we were using our bodies, we were mimicking animals, and at the same time, we were also connecting. We're also connecting with each other as a teacher-student, and the students were connecting also, and there was so much benefit to that as well. And they would come in and they would beg for that. Can we do that laying down relaxation thing? You know, can we do balloon breath today? Can we play the chime listening? I love that. And I realized that all of those things that they were asking for were mindful practices, right? They were just really engaging, developmentally appropriate, quieter, more meditative, more mindful practices. They loved the yoga poses, but I think they loved them more because they had a chance to get in their bodies and really focus on something, one thing at a time. So again, we had the fun and games, but yet what they were actually craving, surprisingly, were the quieter, more mindful activities. That's really interesting. And that just started my brain going, you know, and the parents started, you know, telling me about their experiences and what they were sharing at home. And then my kids got into school and I started going into the school and volunteering because I was Mrs. Yoga. Oh, the yoga ladies here, you know. So I go into the classrooms and, you know, all kids have different reactions. I have two very different kids. So at the time, I have teenagers now, but at the time my daughter was in first grade. And I would go into her classroom and she would want to be with me at the front of the class, you know, helping me bottle, and, oh, mom's here, this is awesome. And then I would go into my son's class. He was in pre-K at the time, and he would hide under the desk and say, can't you just be a normal mom? I hate it when you come in and do yoga. So, but both of my kids know when it is to pause, to notice what's happening in themselves, and to make a mindful choice, whether that's to take a second, gather my thoughts, take a deep breath, choose something to do that's going to help myself self-regulate, and then be able to move on to be, less reactive in whatever we're going to do next. Whether it's trying to go to sleep at night, that's been a real issue in our house. I have one child who really has a lot of anxiety when he was a youngster, and certainly these practices helped him tremendously. And so though I can't pay him in ice cream cones, right, to get on a yoga mat, he knows what to do when he's having a tough time to sleep, when his heart's racing, his brain's racing. He knows to do that. His favorite go-to breath is ocean breathing, and he'll do ocean breathing and help himself go to sleep. So, yoga and mindfulness looks different for everyone. Everybody resonates a little bit a different way. So it's important that I think when we're teaching for ourselves, practice might not look like somebody else's, and that's okay, right? So, I know that's a different part of the conversation, but anyway, that's how it all started. And so here I am, ChildLight Yoga and Yoga for Classrooms, which is the more school-based affiliate of the Yoga and Mindfulness for Children trainings that we do.
Right. Okay. Wow. I was trying to keep up with you, taking notes that I'd like to follow up on, but that's great. You covered that's a good introduction. I'm curious. You mentioned that your kids know how to pause and avoid being reactive. Probably not all the time, like any of us, but yeah.
Right. Thank you.
But I remember in the workshop of the Yoga for Classroom workshop that I sat in on, it seemed like a lot of the emphasis was on the teacher kind of reading the room and the energy. So are the kids like too hyper to do anything? Do I need to calm things down?
Right.
Or are they lethargic?
Right.
Would you say that is part of the so the exercises that the teachers would then lead them through helps the kids learn to recognize their own energy and what they need to do in order to be productive in that moment or happy in that moment? Or
there's so much going on there. So you're right. So when we do our workshop for teachers, so from the teacher's perspective, what we're really teaching is this big toolbox of things, right? So we can all have this toolbox, like read a book or take a training and have this big toolbox of resources and tools that we can integrate with our kids in the classroom. So for example, if we have a class that's climbing the walls, there are some tools and things that we could try that might help to bring our energy down and get everybody back grounded and centered from the same place so that we can learn and move on with the day altogether. Having the ability, though, to be able to recognize what's happening without judgment, without being reactive to it, right? As an adult educator or parent or whatever, the adult in the room, is so critical. And so what we're really teaching is how to be mindful as a teacher, right? That really has to come first. And so what we're definitely teaching things to share with the children. And then at the same time, we're teaching how we as the adult educators in the room can also be mindful in the moment, to be able to even pause, scan, notice what's happening without judgment, just with curiosity, right? Like, oh, it's getting a little hectic in here. And I might even say as a teacher, and this is what we tell, our teachers, ask the students, hey, how do we feel the energy is in here right now?
Nice.
Right? Like, give it to them. Have everybody look at each other and be like, oh yeah, it's a little, all right, well, what should we do right now? What do you think would be helpful in this moment? So again, you're modeling that being aware of what's happening. This is mindfulness 101, right? Noticing without judgment, and then pausing, and then kind of asking a question like, oh, okay, well, this is what's happening. Maybe now we can make a mindful choice. So together together. So now you've got the community building, the relationship building, and then we can make a mindful choice together and then practice maybe whatever that is. So maybe we decide that balloon breath has always been really helpful in bringing the class community together and getting us, down and ready to learn. And so someone might recommend that. Great. Johnny, would you come up and do you want to grab the card or whatever it is, or do you want to use the Hoberman, the little mini Hoberman sphere for this balloon breath, and have them lead, right? So now leadership, student engagement, we're all in it together as decision makers. It's developmentally appropriate, right? It's engaging.
Yeah.
We've got a focus for the eyes if we're using the Hoberman sphere, and if not, balloon breathing, I just use my hands. Sometimes kids, it's really important to have, right? Like something for them to focus on visually in addition to maybe having that breath focus as well. It gives an anchor, it's additional anchor for the focus. But so to your point, that's a lot of what we teach is how to be really a mindful teacher at the same time that we're sharing these practices with our students so that they themselves can learn how to be more self-aware and how to self-regulate as needed.
Yeah, nice. That's a crucial point. I was kind of skipping over the teacher component in a way, right? Because it can be frustrating as a teacher when things seem out of control or not the way you had planned them to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as a parent, right?
Or as a parent. Yeah.
As a parent.
Yeah. So for the kids in those moments, then the more they get exposed to the various yoga poses and other exercises, then the more of a toolbox they have when the teacher says, what do you think we should do here?
Yeah. And one of the key things that we really emphasize too is that you choose something, we practice together, and then we reflect on the experience.
Yeah.
So you stay with that mindful awareness. You stay with, okay, well, what's going on now? Notice what's happening with your breathing. Notice what's happening with your heart rate. Where are your shoulders? What's happening in your body? Where's your mind? Is it different maybe than it was before, right? So reflecting, and we talk a lot about neuroplasticity, right? Like what you practice becomes easier. Right?
Yeah.
The more you practice something, the more it kind of just becomes a habit that you don't even have to think about anymore.
Right.
When we add in that post-practice reflection process, it's like doubling the groove in the brain, right?
Yeah.
It's like doubling that roadway to build that new habit. And I found that to be so true and so the case. I mean, think of it, a teacher in a class group having that conversation and sharing with each other their experiences and talking about, I noticed my breathing slowed down, or I'm so much more relaxed now, I almost want to go to sleep. You'll get all kinds of responses, but I feel like I can focus better now, or I noticed that I was able to stay with my breath, or whatever it was. That reflection process as a class community just emphasizes the whole process of the noticing, mindful choice. And then eventually we call it integration. It's like that ability to just then, in a stressful moment, perhaps we just immediately go to balloon breath instead of having to really think about it and talk about it, right? It just becomes integrated. So it's a habit now.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that could be almost invisible. I mean, one student might just recognize I need that, and they do it. And
exactly. Yeah. We talk a lot about that these are tools that we can walk around with. And of course, the breath is the thing that we have, the most access to. That's the most simple to do anytime. Nobody really has to know that you're even doing it. But yeah.
Right. Nice. Those are all really great points. The inclusion of the kids, the community, the reflection. And I love the concept of, I think, identifying unproductive habits and modifying them, to me, is one of the central benefits of mindfulness. And you've adapted that in language that, as you say, that's developmentally appropriate. So what age groups, I know I've asked you this before, but what age groups have you exposed this toolbox to? Well,
our ChildLight Yoga program honestly starts at at the babies, right? But you can't really teach babies. But who you're really teaching are the parents or the caregivers. So really, we start there, and then preschoolers for sure. This is the beginning, right? And it looks a little bit different, of course, than the presentation for the older kids. But yoga for classrooms specifically really focuses on integration in a classroom setting. And so, hopefully we're not putting kids at desks and tables and in a quote unquote official classroom, traditional classroom setting until they're, at least in kindergarten. So we primarily with this particular program focus on kindergarten and up. And even more so, I think we fit into the elementary to early middle school bracket.
Yeah. So I also wanted to come back to a couple of points that you made when you were talking about some of your early experiences and the struggles that you went through. You mentioned that it was really important for you to feel like you were in a safe space.
Yeah.
And so even in a classroom, I think that's also important, and was wondering if you wanted to, if you agree, and if you wanted to speak to that a bit.
Yeah. Gosh, I hadn't, I'm looking at the questions. I hadn't really thought about really thinking this out ahead of time. But, I think if we all think back to those teachers that we had, right? If you think back to your favorite teacher, or your favorite teachers, and you think about how they were and who they were in their classroom, in their teaching, in their responses to the students, in their relationships. Typically, those are the teachers who made you feel the safest. It's just how it goes. You felt the most comfortable with them. You remember I forget what the saying is, but you don't remember what a teacher taught you necessarily, but you do remember how they made you feel.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think, right? And I think that the safety thing is the foundation. What's it? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Yeah.
The safety piece has to come first before the relationships can be built and, learning can happen and all of those things. So if we're being a mindful teacher, that kind of happens naturally.
Yeah.
Because we're in tune with our kids and we're responding to the needs of the moment. So and that's certainly what was happening in the room. My very first, quote unquote yoga class in the treatment facility is that I had a relationship with the teacher who was teaching, right? I had been there a month or whatever at that point. And I knew the other people in the room. It was a safe setting. They didn't play any weird wonky music, sometimes that you'll hear in a yoga class, depending on, people like different things, but I'm not much into Indian music myself. I love it that other people love it, but I'd rather listen to, Sade or something. I don't know. But it was just safe, and I felt safe, and I had relationship. And I think that relationship piece, and I knew there was compassion there. And I knew that if I had an issue that teacher would be there to support me. And when I didn't close my eyes, in Shavasana, the relaxation at the end, nobody was yelling at me for that, right? I had permission to take care of myself, and I knew that. So, it's the same thing, I think, that would be the hold true in the classroom.
Yeah. And a lot of what you had already mentioned too, I think, contributes to that safety. Respect comes to my mind.
Sure.
And so asking kids, what do you think of what's going on in here? I mean, that kind of inclusion.
Yeah.
And then the follow-up reflection that you're talking about, again, shows a sincere interest in them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so would you say choice is also important? So you had just mentioned if you, in this case, didn't feel comfortable closing your eyes, that was okay. Yeah,
I definitely think so. It's kind of a whole other workshop, but I think because of my own personal history, when I developed what was originally ChildLight Yoga, and it's grown so much from what it once was, and as I've just chose which activities to focus on and how to present them from the Yoga for Classroom side, I think I intuitively knew what was trauma sensitive. Do you know what I mean? Like I had a sense of that without anybody telling me, just because, well, would this be comfortable to me? You know, if I, you know, and I knew clearly there were yeses and there were nos. And even then, I still feel like there's a couple of things that we do in the classroom. One is putting the hands on the desk. It's called desk puppy. And then backing your bottom up so that you can really, and then coming down so you can stretch your hamstrings and your shoulders and so forth. And depending on how a classroom is set up, right? You know, everybody, if everyone's heads are down, that's pretty safe for everybody because nobody's looking at your behind. But if you're in a middle school classroom and that's not necessarily the case, and just the girls were to go into desk puppy and the boys didn't have to, that would that would be an unsafe situation, right? I mean, to most people, you'd be creating some unsafety. So, you know, no matter what you're doing, I think it's really important to constantly be monitoring and asking yourself, you know, is this going to be safe for everybody? And also to ask, you know, what do you guys think? Here's what we're going to do. Here's how it goes. You know, how do we feel about that? Let's try it, you know, and if not, always having an option out. So you can watch, as long as we're respectful in the classroom. And that's, you know, that was the case in the hospital for me too, you know, hey, so long as you're respectful to the rest of the group, you want to opt out of something, that's fine. And what I've really realized too, is that on occasion, when students do opt out, or even adults for that matter, you know, when I'm giving a workshop, it's the same thing. They're still taking it in, you know, they're listening, they're hearing the reflection, they're watching. And it's amazing how many times my opt-out kids will be the ones, you know, 2-3 weeks down the road, pull me aside and say, hey, yeah, I was having a hard time sleeping, or you know, my brother was really irritating the other day and I did this. And it was something that they hadn't participated in, you know?
Yeah, nice.
So I really love the idea of choice and also leadership too, giving opportunities for leadership. First of all, I think it's really engaging, right, for the students, but it also tells a student that I see you that this might not be, I get what you're doing here, right? Like I get you. How would you feel about, hey, can you be in charge of the music? You know, give them something that they can do to be part of the experience.
Nice.
So that they're not just you know, opting out and shutting down. Right. There's something to be doing. With middle schoolers, at times we have reflection journals. And so there's a couple key questions. We'll say, you know, as you're listening and watching the rest of the class, you know, be thinking about, what are you noticing? What are, you know, that kind of thing, just so that they're involved in the process and they're involved in the reflection, even without doing triangle pose, you know? It's not about the pose. It's not about the pose or the breath, or the visualization, or the, you know, other things that we do. It's really about how they're being done mindfully, and you know, the experience of that inside and outside with others. Nice.
I know one of the things that popped into my mind, we obviously work with different age groups where my students are college, right? But I do get some students who sometimes it's just initially, sometimes it's the entire semester. They don't want to engage in the meditation practices.
Sure.
And I will do my best to have them still stay in the room so that, like you say, they're still participating at some level.
Right.
And they're there for the reflection afterward, and then often can apply some of the same skill set.
Sure.
But I love the what you pointed out about the leadership component. So is there some way that they could still contribute so they don't feel excluded?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. And I don't know exactly what that would look like. Sometimes if it's appropriate, it could be even leading the activity, but it depends if they're ready for that, or if that's even comfortable, right? Or what it is for that matter. You know, a first grader might not be able to read the visualization script, right? So you have to kind of use your best judgment. But yeah, I think choice is huge, and still being engaged somehow in the experience in some way, even if it's writing about it as you're in it, watching everybody else or being in the same room with everybody else as they're experiencing it, I think is still helpful. I think it's still helpful and has some level of impact, maybe a different, even better impact in some ways, right? Yeah. Maybe everybody should take a turn being that person.
That's really interesting. Right? Yeah. Maybe I'll try that.
Yeah.
So a couple of my other notes were, you said that initially, and this actually plays into what we were just discussing at some level, that initially you hated these experiences. You hated the meditation. You hated, right?
Right.
And so when we do get students who are like, no, that's not what I'm about, or whatever, that makes me feel uncomfortable. Yeah. It's very interesting to me that you initially, of all people now, hated it.
Yeah.
And now you're having such a strong influence, and you believe in this work so completely. So it gets back to sort of the question, how do we handle students who hate it in a way that might still be helpful? Do you think that that these practices are helpful to everybody, or are there some people that maybe not?
I think different practices for different people. I think that's something that we really have to remember. I myself am not a big traditional meditator.
Yeah.
Admittedly.
Yeah.
I am a horrible traditional meditator. I want to do it. I want to be able to, I wish, and I know people that can sit for 20, 30 minutes, an hour. That's not me. It's just not going to be me. And I really want to do it, but I would rather, much rather, and I think benefit in some ways even more from personally for myself, going to Vaughan Woods down here, down the road by myself in the forest, and walking in nature, and maybe taking some pauses throughout and sitting for a few minutes to just be in that nature. And I do that. There are little sitting spots as you work your way around. That's my meditation. That's my favorite meditation. I have lots of meditations. I do breathing meditation, of course, right? But that long periods of sitting thing, it's not my first choice.
Right.
When I have someone guiding me, I can do it. But to have that be my own self-practice, have that be my idea, like, oh, I think today I'm going to sit down, and for me, I prefer yoga class, gentle yoga class, nature walk. So I think it's really important to remember that mindful meditation can look different for different people, and it's okay. I think we tend to really kind of zone in on this idea of this sitting practice, and I think there's tremendous benefit to that. If everybody could do it, that would be wonderful. But I would think we run the risk of pushing people away or scaring them away when we hint at that's the way, right? And that there aren't all of these other opportunities. Should we maybe start there? Yeah, probably. Just that practice of being still, I think, is huge. But an official long-term sitting practice, I don't know. But I will say, I think we should start there, while also providing a very specific anchor for the focus, whether it's the breath or something else.
That's interesting. So tell me if I'm reading too much into what you're saying, but it's interesting that you think we should start there. And part of what was going through my mind as you were talking, I'm remembering people at various workshops that I've given in the past saying, oh, well, mindfulness is just like when and then you can kind of fill in the blank, when I take a bubble bath or take a walk or go to the gym. And I'm never quite sure how to respond except with some sort of follow-up question, because it depends kind of, well, how do you take a walk? Right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
So
I guess that's why I'm saying I think it's important to know what one point of focus is in the first place. And I think that that's easiest to do when you start with a breath practice and a sitting meditation type of thing, right? You got to establish some kind of foundation of what even this mindful meditation even is.
Right.
And then I think once you have that, you can apply it. Now, for me, I think it started more with yoga.
Yeah.
So it was going to yoga class that kind of opened my mind to this idea of mindfulness in the first place. And so for me, I came to it first through an embodied mindfulness practice.
Yeah.
And then I was able to learn to sit. And then I was able to apply that to my nature walks and cooking and, right, hopefully communication and conversation and all kinds of other things in our life. But when artists are painting and when a piano player is just like totally in their music and they're not even thinking about playing, that they're just playing, there's something to that too, right? Like that's also, I think, a type of mindfulness, of just being in that, just being so in the moment and so in the flow, that it's really a true meditation, I think, in some instances. Yeah,
I agree with you. There are so many different ways, of being mindful and the various skills that are involved. So the musician, I think of as being in flow, or the zone is for an athlete. But which is wonderful and all kinds of benefits. But then it's very different from noticing your uncomfortable emotions and not being reactive, right? It's a different skill set. But
it is. Yes, it is, isn't it? Yeah, true.
But interesting, because it's all under the umbrella.
It's all under the umbrella. Yeah. Or maybe, so that's maybe more meditation, right? Where mindfulness is being truly in the moment, fully aware of what's happening within and around oneself, right? So I don't think you wouldn't necessarily be doing that. You're right. If I was playing in piano and completely in the zone, a bomb could go off next to me and I probably wouldn't even notice, right? So that's not exactly the same. That's not exactly the same thing.
But there's a lot of overlap. It's interesting to me how much there is involved in what seems like a very simple practice.
I know, right? Yeah. And and how all of that opens up this. I've been talking a lot about self-compassion lately, and it just, to me, ties so much in with self-compassion and also joy. Joy in the everyday, moment to moment stuff that we wouldn't even necessarily think of as joyful, but when we're, the gratitude piece, there's just so much there. It's so rich when you really dive in.
Yeah. So the self-compassion, I think, is a big one. And it so non-judgment of yourself is one way of looking at that. Yeah. And it doesn't surprise me in a way, that study that you referred to in the beginning, that 50% of high school students have some level of depression or mental challenges, because I get a lot of those students right in college.
Right, sure.
And it's really gratifying to see and hear them talk about how they have come to observe their own self-talk, and realizing how unproductive and negative that can be, learning to let go and open, but at the same time not beating themselves up for having it.
Right.
Yeah. So is that related? You said you've been talking a lot or thinking a lot about self-compassion lately. Does that overlap with those kinds of?
Oh, completely, 100%. I think we always teach what we need to learn ourselves, right? It's how it goes. So, this idea of learning to notice when I have negative self-talk or negative thoughts about myself, that has come because of this practice of mindfulness, right? It's just like noticing what's happening here without judgment, with a little self-compassion, with compassion for the situation, with curiosity, right? I love the word curiosity, because curiosity just means, oh, like, what's going on here? You're not passing judgment or deciding to do anything. You're just like, huh, this is interesting, right? And just kind of, I love that word.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you'll hear the word kindness too. So with curiosity and kindness, which is really along these lines. And when we start to do that, we can start to recognize, when we're maybe not being as kind to ourselves as we should be. And one of my favorite practices is positive opposites. So this positive opposites and being able to take maybe a negative self-talk and turn it around to something more positive or kind, right? So it might not be exactly opposite. Like, I'm feeling angry, I'm happy. No, that doesn't really work. Right. But what's really going on? I'm frustrated.
Yeah.
I'm noticing that I'm frustrated. I know that because my shoulders are up, my heart's beating in my chest. I feel like lashing out a little. My muscles are tense, right? I'm aggravated. I'm frustrated about something. And so when we're feeling that or noticing that, what could we say to ourselves that would be maybe not the positive opposite, because it wouldn't feel authentic, but something that's kind and inviting, right? It's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to feel frustrated, and that could be all that it is, or you might want to add something to that. It's okay to feel frustrated. A few deep breaths can often help with that. Maybe I'll practice that now. So it's like turning that, frustration into a self-compassionate practice, that this real awareness of like, okay, but what if, I did this instead or thought this way. Big one that comes up for me is I'm a crazy bad mom, and any adults watching this might feel that too. Like, I go to bed sometimes and like, this was not a good day. I'm the worst mom. I just had a big blowout with one of my kids. My heart's racing. I'm not feeling good about myself. I'm a crappy mom. That's what I say to myself. And then I we can catch ourselves in those moments and, how can I change that around? I'm a good mom. Today was not my best day. It just lessens it a little bit. I'm a good mom. Right? Today was not my best day. Tomorrow's a new day. Right? Yeah. So it's like, how can we put a positive spin? And it's amazing the power of your words to yourself, right? Like, it's so much science behind that. So much. I mean, really, even just probably saying that, people can hear like how that feels for me. And I actually say that to myself. So we work a lot on that, but it really goes back to noticing what's happening with compassion in the first place to even be able to do that.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
So I would imagine that these kinds of conversations sometimes come up in the reflection piece with the class. Yeah. We actually teach this process to students. Okay. It really goes along with an education too. It goes along with the growth mindset. Ideas, right? So it really ties in really well with all of that. I can't do it, I can try my best, right? Like, you can see how you spin that around. So it's this positive mindset, growth mindset. So we talk a lot about positive opposites in Yoga for Classrooms, and we take kids through how to do it. There's a great book, actually, Louise Hay's book. Louise Hay, she wrote a children's book, believe it or not, and it's called I Think, I Am. And it's wonderful. And it's a book of, how to, I forget the subtitle, but it's a group of kids go to a park. It's illustrated, right? An amusement park. And each page is a different kid having a different experience in what they might be saying to themselves, right? Which is really negative. Well, instead, you might think, and then she helps them turn it around. Neat. And it's just, it's a different situation all throughout. It's one of my favorite books to demonstrate to children how we can do that. And it's very empowering, for kids, that you don't have to be your thoughts. You don't have to be your thoughts, right? You don't have to, that doesn't have to be true. We have the power to turn things around. Yeah. And it's a real gift you're giving to be working with kids at that age. I liked how you started this conversation talking about resilience, and you used the term preventative medicine, but you put medicine in quotes.
Yeah, I can't say medicine, right? Because it's not really.
Right.
In my mind, yeah.
Yeah, but how beautiful if we can prevent some depression and mental health challenges and things that so many students obviously experience, people experience.
It's all about building new habits of mind. That's not something that you do by a teacher introducing something once, right? So my whole focus is on how can we empower a whole school to take this on school-wide, every single teacher, every single student. We're all practicing, we're using the same language. We're practicing the same thing. When I graduate from 3rd grade and I go to 4th, Mrs. So-and-so is doing the exact, that's challenging.
Yeah.
But I think it's really what it takes. So, ultimately, really big picture, I want educational policy change so that, social emotional learning, mindful practices are standard and just part of what we do in our education. And it'll happen. It'll happen at some point. It's already moving, I think, slowly but surely in the direction. We have whole conferences now, right, focused on mindfulness in education, yoga in schools, mindful practices in general for youth and in school. So it'll come, but it's not something that happens overnight as a big picture or as a day-to-day picture for any individual child. So I think if this is really something that we're going to do and think about as far as prevention goes, it's something that we really need to decide is important and make it systematic.
And you have worked with at least one school system that really embraced it, right?
Yeah, I'm working with several school districts, schools and school districts across the country. But quite honestly, I don't provide a lot of direct support. So the way that we have our training set up is we really empower schools from the inside. So we teach the school people, usually there's a leadership team. We teach the school's leadership team to be able to, for themselves and their own school structures and around their own school goals and their typical, the needs of their students, the demographics of their students. Every school is so different from each other. So all of that has to be taken into consideration. So there's no cookie cutter, rollout plan. There really can't be. I don't believe in it. I think from my experience, every school is so different. It's not, you don't have to start from scratch. You can have a big toolbox and lots of ideas. And then there needs to be this opportunity for the school people themselves to pick and choose what works for them and then to roll it out into their structure in a way that makes sense and is accessible and going to be effective at that particular school. So that's how we're doing it. And we've seen some pretty good success. Some schools have dove right in and just owned it from the very beginning, where they, come September, it's a school-wide initiative and here's what we're going to do. I've got that one school in Des Moines, inner city school in Des Moines, very unique school. If anybody wants to watch the video, it's on the Yoga for Classrooms webpage. It's like the main video on the homepage. Very, very interesting what happened at that school. They took the bull by the horns, decided that they were going to integrate yoga and mindfulness throughout the day. And in addition, a set time in the morning to the start of the day, and then a more mindful meditative practice for 10 minutes right after lunch and recess, right? Which tends to be the kind of crazy time of the day. So they very, very thoughtfully put together the structure of how they're going to roll it out and what they were going to do every day for the whole year. So they took our curriculum and they stretched it out so that it stretched out over the whole year. And there's a lot of SEL crossover with the lesson plans and so forth. And after 2 years, after year one, it was amazing. Like, oh, okay, but let's do another year and make some tweaks and see if this is still. So their behavior referrals, went down from over 1,000, over 1,000 behavioral referrals in 1 year, down to like 200 and something.
Wow.
In 2 years. And then their academic data. So they looked at their Iowa State assessments. And this school, which I believe don't quote me, but out of 70 whatever schools in the district, they were the lowest performing school in the district. Now, keep in mind, they have a lot of refugees, lots of different languages spoken, lots of things going on. But it was the lowest performing school, and their Iowa State assessments had an 18.7% overall improvement across the board, which is nuts. I mean, you never see that kind of improvement. So did they become the highest performing school? Of course not, but they had the highest level of improvement in the entire district. And this was the big major thing that they had changed. So, it's just amazing. And I've gone to that school a couple of times to observe. I really try to be hands off because, like I said, our model is to let the school do their own thing. And I'll offer support if there's a question, hey, do you have any ideas on whatever? And I'll throw my ideas in, but I really let the schools do their own thing. And I feel like that teaming idea and that it becomes, all of this becomes intrinsically motivated instead of something coming in for, yet another, program to take on and roll out. And it's fun to see because I think what happens is that the schools and the teachers see what an impact it's having, and then it just kind of, it's like a snowball effect.
Sure.
I want more. I want to do this more, It's not all happy-go-lucky. There's some challenges, of course, like with anything, but it's been pretty neat to see what's happening and to hear from the other Yoga for Classroom school implement leaders is what we call them, implement leader teams at all these other schools that fill me in on occasion and let me know, what's going on. It's pretty inspiring. So, what we hear a lot of is self-regulation ability, improvements in self-management, relationships, of course, all these SEL competencies, but also, behavior. Behavior is a big one.
Yeah.
And climate, classroom climate, school climate, also teacher and student engagement. I know Edmonds does in Des Moines, they do the Gallup, they use the Gallup poll. So their Gallup poll data showed some improvements in student and teacher engagement as well. And what was the other thing I was just going to mention? Obviously academics, right? Yeah, academics and performance. And then teacher resilience as well. So, right? If my classroom is more mindful and we're connecting as a class community and my classroom climate is improved, teaching and learning is becoming, a little bit more easy maybe or less stressful. I'm practicing along with my students. We're learning together. Suddenly, I'm not as stressed,
Yeah.
I went into this one classroom after lunch and recess when I was there observing. And of course, they dim the lights, the whole school. Lights are dimmed. Soft music is playing in the classrooms. Kids come in from lunch and recess and they transition into, they usually do like a visualization or they'll have mandala coloring or some other things. It's different every day, but it's usually a nice segue to the afternoon. And I went into this one classroom and the students were doing what they needed to be doing, this really calm and peaceful setting. And the teacher was just sitting there at her desk, literally felt safe enough to actually have her eyes closed. And she was sitting there just quietly. And I said, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but my goodness, your classroom is so peaceful that you actually feel safe enough to shut your eyes. And she said, yeah. And she admitted to me that she was ready to quit teaching. And she said, this 10 minutes after lunch and recess is like not just hitting the reset button for my students. It's like hitting the reset button for me. Yeah. And nice. It saved me. She said, I because of this 10 minutes of my day, I'm able to continue on, with the rest of the day and then come back the next, and on and on and on.
Yeah. So amazing.
It is amazing. Yeah. So there's that impact too, I think, which is just as important, if not even the most important, right?
Sure.
Is thinking about teacher well-being and the emotional resilience that they can develop as well.
Yeah, it's good to hear that. I remember some of the early studies focused on teacher burnout and how mindfulness can help to reduce that. And so your experiences show that seems to be true. And I would say that it is, but it's a great contribution to the field for sure.
Yeah.
So I told you that I would keep an eye on the time, and we're approaching the hour mark.
Wow.
Yeah,
so
it goes
fast.
by. Yeah. Typically, the kinds of answers that the kinds of questions that I go to at the end are sort of more big picture, but you've already been talking a bit about big picture, like what do you think the promise is of mindfulness in education? What are some of the challenges, perhaps? Do you have anything more to say on any of those big topics?
I think I've talked about the opportunities that we have and what my hopes and dreams are. As far as the challenges, and I know I don't want to end on a negative Nelly note, but the challenges are the climate that we're in, right? From a policy standpoint and a political standpoint, I think that's not helpful. I think that the challenges on a smaller scale are budgets, school budgets. Does everybody pretty much want to have these trainings and have this be part of core? They do. We are inundated with inquiries. So, the challenges are bringing this forth into schools in a really accessible way, from a financial standpoint, making it really accessible and easy for schools to take it on. And also, I think sometimes, though, there are schools, districts, administrations that aren't quite ready for this either, right? So you have these teachers that were just begging, and their higher ups are not quite ready for it. So, always, I think the reason I put the research repository and had that put together, and I've done and I speak at conferences, and I think we still have some work to do from a buy-in standpoint. Of course, there's this fear too sometimes about, is this a religious practice? And, so addressing all of those concerns, I think it can sometimes be a challenge. There are answers to all of it. I mean, we have the research, we have the evidence, we can explain how this isn't religion. But then there's still the buy-in that has to happen. And I think, although there's been such a shift, it's really exciting to see how far if we couldn't have had this conversation 5 years ago, right? Just in these few short years, it's wonderful to see the direction we're going in. But I still think we have a little bit of ways to go. And then from there, we need to make sure that we have the resources and the policy backing, right? To actually make this integrated into our education system.
So for people who are just starting to get into this field, teachers maybe mainly, but also maybe administrators, do you have any suggestions for them about how to, maximize their chances of success?
Maximize their chances of success in doing what?
In productively applying mindfulness in education.
In the roles that they have,
whether
they're a teacher or an administrator. I think the easiest thing to do, I want to say easiest because it's not always easy, right? From a financial or a time perspective, is, to get some training, to get, like anything else, to go learn about something. If it's of interest to people to, what could this do? What are the benefits? How can I learn this? How can I integrate this into my classroom or with my staff? Even if I'm an administrator, how can I start planting seeds? Taking a training and attending conferences is a really great way. Actually, both of those things. I'd take a training and then I'd go to a conference so that you have a foundation for what the conference is about. Attending an hour-long sessions at a conference, you'll get little things, but actually diving in, to some kind of intensive, I think is important. Even if it's just a day long, and then taking it from there. There are so many resources out there, so many great programs, so many great conferences, so many wonderful books, and lots of people out there, lots of schools who are already doing this. So, if you can find one of those schools and have a conversation or stop by, observe, those are great opportunities to learn too, and just see for yourself what it's all about. And then when you do get to be an educator or a school administrator or a school counselor, don't hesitate to integrate what you've learned into your work. right away, make it part of what you do and who you're going to be as that leader in your school.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Those are great suggestions and well delivered, passionately delivered.
Thank you.
So to wind up then on a more personal note, I'm curious, you've been involved in the field for a long time.
Yeah.
And you've had a lot of success. So yes, you have.
It's relative, but yes.
So I'm curious where you hope to go from here.
Yeah. So I've got a lot going on, as you can see, and I have lots of interests. And, I think one of the challenges that I have personally is not taking on too much.
Mm-hmm.
I really do want to be at all the conferences, speaking and learning, and I want to be part of the brainstorming that's going on how to change policy. So there's this group that kind of talks on the side, and then create more curriculum and head up ChildLight Yoga trainings and head up yoga for classrooms. And I have a studio and training center also in Dover, New Hampshire. That's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. But I think what I've really decided the last couple of years is that my true passion is making sure that kids have this opportunity to learn these practices from a young age. Mm. And where does that happen? Where are they the majority of the time? They're at school. And so my real focus now and probably for the foreseeable future is really diving deeper into making yoga and mindfulness for classrooms like more accessible to more people, to more schools. And so the ChildLight Yoga trainings are awesome. We've got trainings for teaching, sharing yoga and mindfulness with children and teens with special needs. We've got trauma-informed yoga for children, ChildLight Yoga in schools. So if you're a yoga teacher, for example, and you want to know how to bring yoga into a school, we've got that. And I have amazing trainers. And frankly, my trainers have written most of the curriculum at this point. And I have an amazing director of trainings. And so that piece of things is really kind of running itself. And nice. I think, so I'm continuing to hand those reins off so that I can focus, I think, more deeply on the school piece. I actually just came from the Yoga in the Schools Symposium, several years running now, an annual conference at Kripalu in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, highly recommended. And there's momentum, it's really fun and inspiring to be in that community of school administrators, educators, school counselors, yoga teachers, all of us program providers in one place, and be able to share what's happening and what we're learning and what we're seeing and case studies and what the research is. There was a whole preliminary research symposium before that. So I really, really highly recommend that for everyone as well. And you'll be seeing me at more of those for sure. More deeply involved, because I think the more of that happens, and the more that this grows, and the more that we brainstorm together as a community, the more likely we're going to be able to swing the pendulum, hopefully, to some policy change that really supports seeing these practices integrated into school. Nice.
Well, I know that kind of enthusiasm that you're talking about at conferences and how motivating and inspiring that can be. And so as a closing, unless there's something else that you want to say, but I'd like to thank you over the years for being part of that momentum. And I'm really glad to hear you say that your plans are to do even more of that, because although it's growing, I think we both agree that our world needs even more. So it's great to know you're on the front lines.
Thank you. And you as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
And so thanks again for making time for this interview. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun. I can't believe an hour has passed already. So thank you.
Yeah, good conversation.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.